So welcome to Tea and Buns. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today, and we're all from different places around the country. So if you know what country you're coming from, please pop it in the chat. We're from the Yuggera and Turrbal people in Brisbane, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that these lands have always been places of research, teaching and learning. So it's absolutely fantastic for you to come along today. Thank you so much for joining us. Tea and Buns is a community of practice where we meet regularly, and as leaders and managers and practitioners in the sector, largely the non-profit and social enterprise sector, but we are open to everybody joining us because we cover a whole array of topics that really are topics that are useful to us to have a chat about, but also we also look at some research, or we talk to an expert or someone who's working in that area, and we pick their brains and we have a chat about what the latest thoughts are about that topic. So today's topic is all about boards and leadership and diversity, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Jackie Bettington with us today. But before I introduce her to you, I would just like to say that we are recording today's webinar, so just so that you know that, but we really want you to feel free to ask questions in the chat, or if you would like to even come off mute, this is a great place to come off mute and have a chat as well. Just keep yourself on mute though when you're not talking, just to avoid any background noise. But please, yes, feel free to ask your questions, join the conversation as if we were in the room together. Tea and Buns is a quote from the Wind in the Willows book, which says, shall we have tea and buns? Maybe we'll make tea and buns could make the world a better place. And that's all this is about. All right, so let's get going. Welcome to everybody who's just joined us in the last couple of minutes. Great to have you with us. We have a question. I have a question for you just to kick off today, because we're going to be talking about diversity, and we know that word well, but I just really want to ask you, do you intentionally aim for diversity on your team? So if you're not on a board, that's fine. On your team or on your board, is there any intentionality about diversity? I'm just really curious. Jackie's curious to know what it is that you do, or is it just something that you're aware of, but you don't do it intentionally? But if you do it intentionally, why do you do it? Let's see what you say. Yes, because we want our board to reflect our community and to bring different perspectives. Great. That's a great answer. Let's see what other people say. It could be your team or it could be your board, because we're talking about boards as a team today. So I'm really curious. You can just put a yes or a no. Okay, great. All right, some of you. So we are looking for diversity. Yes, but it doesn't always end up happening. Okay, so that means, yes, we can be intentional, but the practicalities of that is sometimes hard. Yes, as much as you can. Yes. Our constitution requires members to represent different regions rather than characteristics. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea. Our board has at least 50% of people living with a disability. That's great. So that must mean representing, again, your community and those that you work with, perhaps. Boards today need more than SMEs on the main purpose of the board, but to be comprehensive governance people with a wide range of experience. Okay, so you're talking about attributes and experience, diverse experiences. Somebody says yes, because problems are complex and multifaceted and we need all the diverse insights. Yes, our mission is to support people living with a disability. Okay, so a lot of people are saying yes. That's what I'm sort of reading here. I have seen some really poor token efforts of diversity. Okay, so again, I think, Jackie, And would you all agree with me from all of those great comments? And thank you for sharing all of that. I'm really interested to see that there seems to be a level of commitment towards diversity, and we have some understanding of why we want diversity, but it doesn't always happen, or it can be difficult and challenging sometimes. Very interesting. And I'm so excited to talk to Jackie about her thoughts on this in a second. So please keep chatting in the chat box, either your thoughts or your observations or just your perspectives. It's a really good way to hear what you're thinking. But I really want to get to talking to Jackie, because Jackie has been spending a lot of time on this issue. Jackie teaches here at ACPNS and QUT, working with directors and boards, but has just completed a PhD, of course, on the topic of financial literacy on boards. So Jackie, tell us a little bit about yourself. I've got a great photo of you here, because I know that you love swimming. So I really want to know a little bit about yourself, but also why do you love boards, and why have you spent so much time researching boards and directors?
Okay, well, I'll explain this photo, and I'm the person on the very end, almost falling off the boat. That was when my son, my number 2 son, had finished swimming the English Channel, and that's him and his girlfriend and I, and Tim, who basically organises the swim. So the year before that, Callum had 2 years before that, Callum had just started swimming and putting in a bit of effort. I'd been swimming, aiming to swim the Channel. He joined my relay team, or our relay team, to swim the Channel. Enjoyed it so much he decided to go back the next year and swim it all by himself. So I figured, I love endurance swimming. 34 Ks is a long way for a slow swimmer such as myself. So the closest I'll get to swimming the Channel is to sit on the boat and watch him swim. So that's the end of the swim. It was a fantastic day, and he did really well for somebody who's a runner and a football player.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's Callum.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your interest in governance and boards. How did you get?
Well, my background is actually as a historian, archivist, and then I ended up working in public sector governance areas, so looking at legislation and so on, and moving into IT governance. But parallel to that, I was serving on various boards, non-profit government bodies and so on. And I was a little frustrated with the dynamics and how boards operated. And I always found it scary that I was at times the financial expert in the room, only because I'd read the financial statements. And even in one case where we were on the brink of insolvency, people were still not motivated to read and work out what was going on. It was a bit of we'll cross our fingers and everything will be all right. And so just through that personal frustration of the insolvency situation, but then the other end of the spectrum where, an organisation drunk on success, financial success, and the behaviours that brought out, concerned me because of the opportunities lost. So I fell into this through frustration, and having gone through several board review processes, I found that I actually enjoyed that side of things. So next minute, before you know it, I've done the ACPNS certificate in non-profit studies, and next thing I'm enrolled to do research and completed a master's in research and PhD in this area. And that's how I stumbled into where I am today. But it's basically the love of board dysfunction and trying to help boards improve so they don't lose opportunities. It's the frustration of lost opportunities rather than the negativity of things going wrong, but the lost opportunities that inspires me to work in this area.
Yeah, I love the word, the board dysfunctions. I mean, I'm sure that anybody who works in non-profit organisations understands that. but we're also very, very passionate about our organisations and our sector. And we really want to find solutions to some of these challenges that we face. And so thank you, Jackie, and thank you for embarking on this huge area of study and for coming along today to kind of share some tips with us and some real practical insights about what you found and how it's going to help us. So thank you.
All right.
Now, I sort of have put a few things together which I thought we could touch on today. And this is basically, I thought we could talk about what is a definition of diversity. What does that mean? And make sure that we all understand, or maybe understand the different perspectives of what that means. And then, does diversity really help us to do better leadership and governance? That's my very curious question. Your research, though, particularly looked at financial literacy. And so let's talk about that and what you found from your particular research around financial literacy. And I was very interested to see what motivates people to read their financial statements. That's a good one that we can ask everybody. And then what are the challenges of diversity and the pitfalls? Because I know that you've found out that there are some challenges and pitfalls. And then how can we make more effective decision making when we are a diverse team? And finally, I want to really land it with some key tips from you, Jackie. Like, what does this all mean? Mm-hmm. What can we go away as directors and as CEOs and people? How can we sort of support and guide the board to be better performers? So that's kind of where I want to go today. But of course, again, anyone online, if there's any questions that you want to ask, please just pop it in the chat and we'll ask Jackie as we go along. Okay. All right. So Jackie, tell us a little bit about diversity then. What does it actually mean? When we asked everybody just now, you know, do they intentionally think about diversity? There was a whole range of answers, from gender diversity to people representing the community or those people that we serve. Can you give us just a definition? What do we mean when we say, because we've heard for a long time, I mean, I feel like I've always heard you should have a diverse people on the board, you know, there should be diversity. I mean, it's around, and that conversation seems to be quite elevated at the moment. But what do we actually mean by that?
That's a great question. And my answer is, I don't know. And the reason why I don't know, it's because it's such a slippery, vague concept, diversity. There's a diversity of interpretations as to what board diversity in particular. Let's just narrow it down to board diversity. So that's one of the fascinating things, and I guess that's part of the pitfalls, which we'll get to later, is that it's such a loose construct, such a loose idea, that it's really difficult to understand how it can be applied in practice and with a view to improving decision effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, boards only produce one thing. All they do is to produce a set of decisions through the meeting process that they undertake. So diversity is viewed as, which is a part of board composition, as a means to enable more robust decision making. And that came out in some of your responses. But what exactly, so if it's about board composition, what exactly what does diversity look like in practice, and how does it work? And I noted that a number of you referenced demographic-based diversity or representational type diversity within your stakeholder communities, or perhaps those who are consumers or beneficiaries of services provided. Skills-based diversity came up quite a bit. Culture and values, there was somebody mentioned about diversity in culture and values, which was interesting, and often people forget that. And then there was the combination of competence and representation. So just with 20-something people online, we've got a whole host of different types of broad responses in terms of what diversity means. So diversity is about difference. The key is to understand how diversity operates. And if you're focusing on one element of diversity, then you might find the effects of of a board composed based on diversity might be quite different. So what you seek may not be what you actually gain. So understanding how the different types of diversity interact and how that influences boardroom dynamics and then decision quality is critical. But that's quite complex. That's a lot of thought and a lot of reflection and a lot of room for error as well as success. So diversity is a diverse construct, and so the key is to understand what your board means by difference and how you're going to use that effectively within your board process.
Yeah, I love that, Jackie. So I think the first thing is to actually make sure that the board has some agreement about what they understand by diversity. What does that mean? What kind of diverse voices or diverse people do they want or need on their board? And I would agree that what you said is that in my mind, and again, I haven't thought about it too much, but I really think that the reason why we need diversity is because we want better decision making. Can everybody just put a 1 in the chat if you agree with that? Is that why you're looking for diversity, or is there some other reason why you're looking for diversity? Is it so that you make better decisions? Because that is what a board does. Yeah, okay, so we've got some agreement with that. But is it true? That's the question that we really need to ask ourselves. Does diversity on the board actually help us make better decisions, if that's the intention of having diversity? Now, I know, Jackie, that you started this research looking at financial literacy, and that was the angle that you took because of your frustrations and going, let's have a look and see what people need to know in terms of their financial literacy. But how did you come to understanding that perhaps there's more to the story than simply, oh, great, we'll get a nice diverse team and we'll make better decisions?
Well, in terms of the diversity issue is the end point of my research, or a key end point of my research. I wasn't touching diversity at all. I was just focusing on financial literacy, which threw up some problems and counterintuitive results. So I thought, what's going on here? So I'll backtrack to the beginning and talk a little bit about director financial literacy and how the diversity sort of issue arose, because I think that is quite an interesting insight to understand how diversity can actually undermine other aspects of effective governance. So financial literacy, or director financial literacy, is, like diversity, another very slippery construct that is thrown around and is really weakly defined in statutes, case law, and other guides that are available across all sectors. So the conventional definition is directors need to be able to read and understand the 3 key financial statements, so balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement, noting that many boards actually don't get a cash flow statement. So that's essentially what it is. And then cases like Centro didn't actually introduce anything more, because this requirement's been around for decades, at least in Australia, but it brought it into sharp focus and basically concern the director community, if you like, in terms of, well, how much do we have to be able to read? How deeply do we need to be able to go? And what's expected in terms of understanding the finances? So that was my starting point. I had to work out what director financial literacy was before I could actually go and research it. So we went about that, and I did a Delphi study with experts in governance drawn from all sectors and so on. And we came up with a bit of a loose definition, and at the beginning, the participants identified over 200 individual concepts, which I managed to narrow down to 97, that each individual director must know. By the end of the Delphi study, it was whittled down to 24 core concepts that all directors need to understand. So those concepts are not difficult technical concepts, but the magic is in how they've used together to weave together the financial story of the organisation and connecting that.
Concepts, basic accounting concepts that every
That's right.
knows.
So in the handout that you've been provided, there is the definition, which is basically the ability to independently read and understand and use those three financial statements that I mentioned to form a strategic view of the organisation's financial story in relation to solvency, position and performance for the purposes of financial monitoring and discharging core director duties. Okay,
and so that's... I'll just stop you there. If anybody's wondering that handout, I just emailed it to people about half an hour ago, but I'll also send it to anybody that needs that handout if you just contact me. But the handout you should have if you're on the registration list, and I emailed it to you about half an hour ago. So just look in your emails.
Oh, I've just lost my screen. There we go, it's back. So that was the starting point. And then basically it's a strategic view of the organisation's financial story and connecting that to the context and what the organisation's doing and where it's going, its mission and so on. So it's not a deep technical understanding. It is limited to accounting literacy, if you like. So the next thing was, okay, now we know what it is, but we don't know how to measure it. There's 47 different ways to evaluate whether a director is director financial literate or an expert. And those measures are largely demographic type measures, career history, education, professional affiliation, those sorts of things. But and perceptions like self-confidence in being able to read financials. Some of those measures actually are identified as like being a CEO, and some measures are identified as being an expert, in others they're identified as being financial literates, and others they're identified as not being financially literate, let alone an expert. So really mixed bag of inconsistent approaches to working out whether somebody's director financial literate or not. So
Can
I went
I just
away.
ask everybody, I'm just going to cut in and just ask.
Yep.
People on the call today do any kind of financial an assessment with their incoming board members around their financial literacy now? Is that something that you do? Do you check they have some core understanding of how to read financial statements? I'm just really curious. A couple of yeses. Yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting, because again, that's something that you might want to think about if you do have a team or a board of directors that have incoming directors and coming to sit on your board. You know, what do you do now to check that they have some basic understanding of reading financial statements or understanding those statements? Because we're going to go into that. And I mean, Jackie, I suppose my next question is, we can give people training. I mean, they don't have to have it at the beginning, and we might say to people, you've got some great skills, or you're someone that we want on the board, but you don't have those core competencies. You can go away and get some training. But is that enough? Ken, did you put your hand up? Did you want to say something? Come off mute.
I did. My experience as a company secretary, just about every board that I've actually been involved with, I walk into a boardroom and my first question I ask them is, have you all, I always say to them, I assume you've all read the financial reports, and I know they haven't. And in fact, no, most of them probably aren't really financially literate anyway. That's just an observation that I've had.
So even if they say they've read the accounts or they've read the statements, it might not mean that they understand them.
Correct.
Or they are able to really ask good questions about them.
Correct. And my second question is when they say, oh yes, we've read them, is okay, are there any questions that are what you want me to cover? And I usually get a stony silence. So I then run through the financials to try and explain to them. But in the last one I was involved, I actually started to put in explanations of how to read a ratio and how to read what the performance indicators would indicate, so they could actually get some indication of what it is that they actually needed to look at and where to find it in the financials and what it meant.
So is that common, Jackie? What has been your experience when you?
That's spot on. That's common, and that's sort of part of the link to the diversity issue. So not surprisingly, once developed the test and got it out there, most directors who aren't financial experts, and I'm talking 90%, so well and truly most, lack the financial capability at the very minimal level to support financial monitoring and the exercise of their core directors' duties, notably due care and diligence and around solvency. So, but what was surprising, and this is the counterintuitive stuff, the participants who took the test had at least, on average, had at least 8 years experience as a board director, routinely read and used their financial statements in board matters on a monthly basis, and had completed training, with some also completing additional top-up refreshers and so on. So that didn't make sense. How could such experienced, trained and on face value diligent directors who otherwise are quite capable, most of them were university educated, held high leadership roles in their organisations on a day-to-day basis, aside from their board roles. So how could these people not sort of be able to understand basic accounting concepts and then be able to identify the implications from a strategic point of view in the financial statements? So what I found in looking further was a combination of boardroom dynamics and individual motivation. And when they were motivated in that they tried, but self-confidence or self-efficacy and how they were recruited to the board seemed to be key factors explaining this surprising find. So what I found was that directors who had been recruited based on skills joined a board and thought, okay, I'm here because I'm a HR expert, for example, therefore I will lead and contribute everything I can on matters touching HR or bringing in the HR perspective across the board business, but I will sit back and rely on others to do the financial monitoring and defer my decision making to those experts in the room. And they don't necessarily need to be financial experts with accounting qualifications and so on. It was more that the person they perceived to have the higher ability in the finances.
If you're called a treasurer, then
Yep.
you're perceived as someone who has expertise in that area.
Yeah. I've got a question there about the differences in the results. There was no statistically significant difference between directors coming from any sector. On face value, directors serving on government boards had a slightly higher average than the others, but not significant, not statistically significant, and still all were well and truly below the threshold. So the pass, there was 23 questions. The pass mark was 18, and the average of all participants was around 13.6. So quite a big margin. You'll be pleased to know everybody who was a financial expert passed with flying colours. So that was reassuring from both my test point of view, but also from board governance point of view as well. So training is necessary, but it's a long way from being sufficient. Just like going through the motions and trying to read the statements, but without connecting them is not sufficient. And experience helps improve, but not enough. So the bottom line is that directors really need to put in the effort to practice and master the financials, focusing on the big ticket items and asking key, high level questions such as, well, are we solvent or not? And breaking that down to things like, well, have we got enough cash to pay our bills? Where is our cash coming from? Where is it going? And what does that mean in terms of solvency? So it's about asking questions of the numbers rather than trying to read them like a book, which is what a lot of directors were doing. Like we start at page 1 and I'll read the statements like a book.
Or I'll just look for the last number and make sure that it...
That's right. Commonly go to the last number, but it's about entering the financials with some questions like the checklist that's in the handout to frame your analysis. So then that's how you reveal the financial story in the statements.
Yeah, look, fascinating, and I think there's no judgment, and I like the fact that this is such a common story across all of the boards that you were talking to, which I think means that, yeah, this is an issue that we need to be challenged with, everybody. And I'm really curious then around, this, so this kind of research around financial literacy and how we are bringing diverse people onto the board, but not all able to really ask good questions about the finances.
Mm-hmm.
How has this led you to think about diversity then on the board? And who is this ideal director then? What does an ideal director look like? Should they be diverse? Or
okay, all right.
Other, findings that you explored.
All right. Well, I'll talk to the link between diversity and financial literacy, and then backtrack to the ideal director, if you like. So, Ruth, if you could go to slide 7. And while you're doing that, I'll also note that an important part of the idea of director financial literacy is being able to independently form your own view. And one of the traps, we always look for the easy solution, me included. I'm not immune to this myself. We always look for the easy way out, particularly when you're dealing with a lot of board matters that are complex and so on. And so things like dashboards or management providing you with ratios is helpful and not something to cease doing. But at the end of the day, you need to form your own view. And director financial literacy, first and foremost, supports financial monitoring of management's use of the organisation's resources. So if you're solely relying on what management tells you and the information that they provide, particularly when they distill it down to very basic, attractive visuals that are easy to access in terms of the message that's being provided, irrespective of issues relating to honesty and so on, you're basically leaning on the people you're to monitor to tell you what the story is. So be mindful of being able to get yourself in a position where you can form your own view from what you see and hear in a critical way, just in relation to performance, growth, and solvency. So back to that issue of how do we get from financial literacy to diversity? In seeking out what's going on here, I came across a couple of good articles by academics Harrison and Klein, and they challenge and unpack this concept of diversity. And they've come up with 3 different types of diversity, and they explain how the dynamics can operate. And this is how I sort of came up with this idea of board expertise diversity can actually undermine effective board performance and decision making. And so their 3 types were separation, which is about having diversity of values, attitudes, beliefs, opinions. All right. So you might find people on the board, some are, really conservative in their views, or you might have others that might be a member of a particular faith and they have strong views based on that faith. Something you might get a lot on sort of school boards where you've got faith-based schools or hospitals and so on. So we have this separation, all right? Then there's variety, which is diversity based on industry experience, qualifications, professional background, expertise and skills, if you like. And then there's disparity, which is diversity based on power and social status within the board. So if you have some high-profile celebrity join your board, they are going to potentially have more influence, irrespective of their ability or their views, simply because they might have that that star power. Or you might find that there's people like founding members of the organisation, leaders in the area who join the board, and then people just sort of tend to they don't want to challenge them, and they don't want to sort of be seen to disrespect them, and so there's the power disparity in the board. So they're the three different types of diversity. And what Harris and Klein say is that it's a bit like Goldilocks. If you have minimum separation, for example, everybody shares the same values. If you have moderate, then you've got a diversity of values and attitudes. And then maximum, you've got this polarization where you could have factions based on particular views or perspectives. And then, so the aim is to try and get to this moderate level. With variation or variety, imagine having a board full of accountants, or imagine having a moderate sort of mix of skills where you might have an accountant, but you might have a bookkeeper as well, okay, where you've got some sort of sharing of expertise. And then you've got the licorice all sorts where you've got one of each, and nobody can actually converse or share the same sort of mental model of their expertise. And then likewise with disparity.
Because I think what I'm hearing you say is that where there is great diversity, people just go back into their corner. They kind of just say, well, I'm the HR expert, or I'm the accountant expert, or and so we tend to kind of just defer it when there is great diversity and people are saying, well, this is what I think and believe, or this is my expertise or my experience. And so we kind of defer that to those people.
Yep, and I'll get into that very shortly. But the thing is, all these different types of diversities can be running concurrently within the board, depending on the issue or the relationship, and who's in the room at the time. So diversity is a really complex construct. So these are just three types. You could have more types of diversity. Notice how it's not so much on demographics. There's nothing about demographics here, but we tend to focus on demographics, and it is often forced through compliance regimes, funding models and so on, that you have demographic-based diversity. But back to Ruth's point. So Ruth, if you could advance to the next slide. So what we've found is that you have, where you sort of skill-based recruitment, you can end up with this very fragile board that operates like another level of management. And it's not that people say, oh, I'm the financial expert, you've all got to give way to me. People give power or influence to the expert in the room, and then they take it when it's their turn. So boards are an interesting teams because they don't have formal hierarchies. The chair is the leader among equals. There's no clear role description. There's just very broad parameters. There's no clear processes. They have to create their own processes. And they're dealing with a whole heap of ambiguous, uncertain type issues as well as operational matters. So, and they're under pressure to operate efficiently. They don't necessarily know each other well. They only meet occasionally, and they're not interdependent. Yes, they produce decisions, but if I just sit back and don't do anything, it doesn't actually stop the business of the board. So there's not that interdependency like when you get in a team-based, a work-based team where, say, a project, everybody's got to play their part to deliver the outcome. So those differences mean that boards can operate under shared leadership, and informally give power to the expert in the room. And so what that means, Ruth, if you could go back to the previous slide, slide 7, you end up with, you might have skills-based diversity that looks like moderate or maximum model there, the variation row in the middle. But in fact, how you're operating is the maximum disparity, where all power and influence and decision-making and work, as in monitoring or understanding issues, is given to the expert in the room, not because they take it, but because other directors give it to them by not engaging. And so you're not getting the diversity of views. So the whole idea, and as many of you identified, was to get robust decision making through multiple perspectives and debate and discussion and, you know, unpacking everything. That's not happening. People will rely on the expert in whichever area, and then they'll defer to their decision now, or their views. Now, there might be some superficial questions, but they're not actually engaging with the substance of the finances, and so on. So that's how the diversity link came in.
I can totally see this and what you're saying. And so the good intentions of diversity is actually a bit of a pitfall as well. It's that backfiring on the idea that diversity does encourage good decision making. But in actual fact, what's happening is people are not doing that because they feel that they're not able to join. Now, there's a whole lot of factors other going on, and I'm sure we can recognise there's things like psychological safety, dynamics, group dynamics, conflict. I mean, we're not going to go into all of that right now, but there are lots of other factors that are perhaps hindering, I suppose. And did this lead you to think about, Jackie, well, what does good diversity look like then if we want diversity? Oh, no, you know, we recognise that diversity is good, but how do we make sure that it is really helping us perform well? What do we need to do then? So what is this diverse board that we really want?
Well, there's a couple of factors there. We need to be mindful of the undercurrents of diversity in play. Just like, you know, if we design our boards based on demographic diversity, but everybody's, you know, got a university education, they all live in the same sort of socio-economic sort of status areas, and so on and so forth, you're getting a superficial layer of diversity. So having a critical mind about diversity and the undercurrents and whether the cause is producing the effects sought. And that's just being reflective, like boardroom reflective practices, and being an individually a good director. So what I mean by good director, Ruth, if you could go to that slide on number 6.
Yeah.
And this is from some other research undertaken. So that idea of independence is about being objective. It does cover those relationship aspects of being independent, which is in legislation and so on. But it's about having that independent ability to form your own view and critically understand things. But when I say critically understand, that's not necessarily to a deep level. If you're not an expert in an area, it's reasonable to focus on the key things, like I said before, solvency, performance and growth. Having something that you bring to the board, certain expertise, so that you can comprehend the issues at hand. Having the time and the attention to devote to the board role, and having the confidence to have a crack and persist at having a crack, and not being put off and not asking questions and seeking further information, or asking for information in a different form because it's not actually helpful. So part of that is identifying with a director role. So what I mean by that was, part of my research identified role identity as a big issue influencing whether directors actually built up their capability. So there's 3 key context-dependent relevant roles for board directors. That is a director itself. So a director with a strong role identity will do all the things that are on the slide. But because people are recruited often on expertise, they tend to identify with the professional role. So 83% of my participants identified with a professional role, and if they could vote twice, whereas 56% said that they identified with the director role. Interestingly, about 80% identified with the organisation identity. So people join a board because of the organisation's purpose or what it means to them. So it could be like a family company in a commercial sense, or there's some affiliation. They do certain things that somebody might value. They might be creative and innovative, and you think, well, I want to be part of that. So it's the organisation itself. So what people are doing is that when they're sitting in that chair as a director, they're either focusing on performing as an expert in a particular field, or they're focusing on the organisation, which it sometimes may counter to because you might focus on the short term, might counter the sort of director role. So thinking about and reflecting on your attributes as a director, and then how collectively we do that. Because if you have a skills-based board, people will bring different, or irrespective, it's not just a skills-based board, but people will bring different expertise to the board. Understanding those and being mindful that other people need to contribute and engage and develop their skills in that area is important.
So yeah, and many boards do use a skills matrix, you know, and they kind of try to recruit to that skills matrix, but maybe this is a better one in terms of actually, and not better, but maybe another layer of saying, well, you know, yes, skills, it is important to have different skills on the board, but maybe there's something else that we need to make sure that we're having as well, so that we're not only recruiting to skills diversity, but there's these things as well that we can actually make sure that is a continual reflection, because people can go through stages of life, you know, especially if you've been on the board for a while, or you're comfortable with, you know, your team. Again, this is about the dynamics that you have on the board, which is why I love that kind of concept of who is on the board in terms of, you know, the culture. What is the culture that you have on the board? And so, yeah, I'm really interested in this. And we're rapidly running out of time, Jackie, and this is so interesting. But I suppose where I'd really like to land it today is with some tips from you then. So given all of this information that you've learned from boards and this research that you've done, you know, what are the things that people can go away and either talk to their board about and just start to raise the conversation and have a chat about it? Or what are other practical things that maybe they should go away and have a look at? Can you give us some tips?
Okay, well, if you could advance to the key, the literacy. Yeah. So in terms of director financial literacy, yes, continue with your training, but practice not just in terms of going through the motions, but practice and focus on those identifying asking the question rather than focusing on the numbers. So look for the answer in the numbers rather than just trying to make sense of the numbers as you see them on the page. That's what an individual can do, but as a board, there's lots of things that you can do. So one of the other things that we found was that the boardroom support and encouragement and the chair facilitation were also critical in encouraging people to develop their capabilities through asking questions or being able to listen to other people ask questions and the responses to those questions, because reading and understanding is also about being able to handle the answer that's provided. So those sorts of things. So a practical tactic is sometimes it's confrontational if a chair goes around and asks everybody in the room, you know, whether they have questions or, you know, what do they think of a particular matter. So if self-confidence is an issue, then that might create more problems, and then people will focus on surface level things like, oh, these figures don't seem right, they don't add up. That's not necessarily helpful. But sort of perhaps cherry picking and not having a strong routine, but having the chair having a sort of suite of tactics to use to try and encourage different individuals to ask questions or point out particular things in the finances, or ask, well, what do you think that means for, you know, delivering our service or the cost of our service, that sort of thing. So that's the chair facilitation. Other processes such as ensuring that you do have perhaps layers of information like those dashboards or those summary reports, but then having the more detailed information so people can scroll down. Other things such as having little sort of meetings outside of the formal board meeting where people can just go through optionally, in a workshop type style, just go through the finances over a coffee or something like that to try and sort of, as a group, work your way through it. And so the checklist that I've provided in that handout is a means to try and help you do that. So checklist for revealing the financial story, and then also the questions under performance, solvency and growth. So using those sorts of tools individually can help you as well, because it's practice and building up confidence to tackle those finances for your non-financial expert. I like the fact that some of you said you have, induction and training as part of the, keep that up. That's excellent. It's important, but it's not going to do everything. In terms of diversity, Ruth, if you could pop to the next slide. It's, again, being mindful of diversity. It's not just filling in your matrix, whatever the matrix may look like, or completing the compliance report to show that you've got X number of people on the board, or you're fulfilling a particular strategy about ensuring there's representation of key stakeholders. That's a surface level. I'm not saying it's not important, but the critical factors for success may be those undercurrents of diversity. So being critical in how you design diversity and being mindful of how it operates in the boardroom, because different people in the room might mean it works differently. So you could have the same representation in terms of skills or stakeholders or whatever on paper, but the dynamic in the room might differ because there could be disparity, imbalances, the disparity variety for diversity type. So think about that, and then use the board structures and processes to make the most of diversity without turning it into another management board. So being mindful of domination. And again, the chair plays such a critical role. And director training, like training in what does it mean to be a director, and touching on the quad model that I showed earlier with independence, bandwidth, motivation and expertise.
Yeah, so important for us to keep thinking of the board as a strategic team. And because it can be so easy when you're given reports from your management just about, what we've done this month, or, very operational, it can be hard to lift yourself up to that strategic thinking level. And so using processes and frameworks that keep guiding you and saying, how are we thinking about this strategically? And what does this operational report mean for us in the future, or mean for us financially, or mean for us, mean for our beneficiaries? I think when we start making sure that we've got those really key strategic questions that we're asking ourselves and our team all the time, it means that we can stop playing in that operational level, which is why a lot of your cases, Jackie, that I know that you share in your course, insolvency happens because we're not asking those strategic questions. And we're not obviously around financials, but it's much obviously more than that when we're thinking about how are we spending our money, but how are we spending our money in relation to outcomes and the purpose of our organisation. Those are just such great thoughts, Jackie. Has everybody gotten something out of that? Please put something in the chat if you feel like you've got something to think about or take away and discuss with your board, because this is a very interesting topic. And it's a very important topic for us to keep thinking about. And so just in closing, of course, we can do more tea and buns, and we, I feel like we could go on, Jackie. We've got so much to unpack here. But if anybody wants any other issues discussed, or wants to think about any other tea and bun topics that would be useful to you, please let me know. But also, I have sent in the email that I have developed a one-day training course for people who want to do strategic leadership and governance, and that's equally it can be any leader from your organisation or director that wants to come along for a one day where I share some frameworks with you about how to think strategically and how to make sure that you've got those processes in place. So you can have a fantastic diverse board, but you're all using those frameworks to help you think strategically. So if anyone is interested in coming to a one-day course, please check the email and the link, or let me know if you're interested in that course. And of course, we do, ACPNS for many years has done something called Develop Your Board, which is an assessment. It's a self-assessment for boards that can actually go away and actually assess themselves on their board dynamics and actually have a look at how well they think they're mentoring and supporting each other, and especially that psychological safety. As you know, I'm really big on that, you know, because I believe that you can have as diverse board as you like, but if you haven't got psychological safety to be able to ask questions, share ideas, share those different perspectives, then yeah, it's wasting your time. So if anybody is interested in assessing your board and getting your board to think about the issues that we've been talking about today, please let me know about that. Thank you, Jackie. Thanks everybody for coming. It's been really insightful for me. Thank you for the handout as well, Jackie. Hopefully everybody has got that now, but if you haven't got it, just let me know, and please let us know. And Jackie, I'm sure will answer your questions, but if you're very interested in doing some more training around governance, again, that's what ACPNS does, so please contact us. Hopefully we'll see you next time at Tea and Buns. Please join us and tell your team and come along to our next Tea and Buns, which I'll let you know about soon. Thanks so much for coming today, folks. Really good to see you all.